Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. We'll get ready to start. I see people are already in, so thank you for joining us today. Um, if you wouldn't mind, somebody just send me a quick thumbs up there in the Q&A just to make sure you can hear me and everything because my internet's a little bit unstable today with the high winds that we have in West Cork. So thank you everyone for attending our webinar today. Very pleased to welcome back Niall Hatch from Birdwatch Ireland. My name is Brona, and Niall is a wealth of information on all things to do with Birdcare. You probably have already seen him at some of our events, or you may have met him or seen him probably on the TV and or other webinars. So I think most of us know at this stage, if Niall doesn't know something about birds, it's not worth knowing. So we're fascinated to listen again today to everything that Niall has to tell us about garden birds and about minding them and improving the biodiversity in our gardens as a result. So just a few things before we start. The webinar should be over at about 12 o'clock, depending on how many questions we get. Feel free to put your questions into the question and answer section at the bottom of your screens, and we'll attempt to get through as many as we can. We're recording the webinar, so you can watch it back later, or if you need to pop out or leave early, you can come back to it and see it again later. Or if you want to share it with any of your friends who might be interested, please do. We have a prize this morning, which is a peckish bird table, which is valued at around €120. And the winner is going to be selected at random out of all the people who registered for the webinar, and we'll announce that at the very end of the webinar. So thanks, guys, for confirming that you can hear me. So I'm going to hand over to Niall and enjoy, and please do submit your questions during, and we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Brona, and hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in this morning. I see we're already off to a fine start with the questions in the Q&A. So the questions when asked about the robin, I will be answering during the course of my talk, so do stay tuned. Yeah, as Brona said, my name is Niall, Niall Hatch. No jokes about my surname, please. And I'm going to be talking today about garden birds, how to care for them, how to enjoy them, how to identify them. The species I'm going to show you today, there's nothing too weird or exotic or unusual. These are all birds you can expect to see in your gardens over the course of the year. And just as Bruno was saying there in relation to the Wi-Fi and the wind, where I am at the moment in North County Wicklow, it's very windy at the moment as well. There's a real storm raging outside, so hopefully my Wi-Fi will hold as well, and fingers crossed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen and hopefully be able to see that. So I'll share that, and then I will start my slides here. So hopefully you can see on my screen there the Birdwatch Ireland logo. This is a bird called a Greenland white-fronted goose. Not a bird you'll probably find in your garden, but one that's very important nonetheless, and one that we were first set up to protect back in the late 1960s when the organization was set up. So before I start, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do at Birdwatch Ireland. We were established in 1968, and we're the largest and most active conservation organization in Ireland. And our main objective is the conservation of wild birds and the places where they live, their habitats, because you can't protect birds in isolation. You protect them by protecting all of the plants that they depend on and their food supplies. And in doing so, you're protecting wider biodiversity. So we always say, as you see with our strap line there at the bottom of our logo, Birdwatch Ireland, protecting birds and biodiversity. It's what we call Birds Plus. You can't just protect the birds in isolation. And in doing that, of course, we're protecting humans as well, because we humans, we rely on the same air and the same soil and the same water as the birds do. So when we see changes in their population, it tells us a lot about what's happening with them. And that's why there's scientific evidence behind everything we do. We're a science-based organization. We have over 15,000 members, but we can always use more. So I'll be making a cheeky plug for membership at the end of this talk. Please do consider it. We really do need your help. And we have, there's a lot in it for you. We have 30 local branches nationwide, including 2 branches in County Cork, one in East Cork and Cork City and one in West Cork. And so there's lots of activities happening there. And they run, between them, our branches run over 450 events throughout the year for our members. Talks, walks, dawn chorus mornings, all sorts of things. And crucially, we're a registered charity. So the money we raise is put to very good use. Now, without further ado, on to the main event. I'm going to be talking to you about some of the birds that you'll see around your gardens and how you can care for them. And I always like to start garden bird talks with this species here. This is the blackbird. And I like this one because it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's black and it's a bird. So it's one of the easiest ones to identify. Well, at least the male is black. This is the male you see on the screen here. And not entirely black though. You see he has a yellow beak and a yellow ring around his eye. And that's a very good way to tell it apart from other dark colored birds like crows, for example. The blackbird would be smaller than any crow you would see in Ireland, but that yellow beak and the yellow ring around the eye, that's a dead giveaway. The female is exactly the same size and shape as the male, but she's a bit different in color. Instead of being black, she's very dark brown overall with speckles on her chest. And so she looks very much like an all dark thrush, which is exactly what she is. The blackbird's actually the most common member of the thrush family that we have here in Ireland. And they're quite a common sight year round, hopping on lawns and up in bushes eating berries. This bird doesn't have to migrate away from Ireland. They can find food here year round. That's what governs migration. People often think it's cold weather is what prompts birds to migrate. And that's true in a sense, but only insofar as cold weather affects their food supply. If a bird like a blackbird can find enough food in all 12 months of the year, there's no need for it to migrate and take that huge risk of flying long distances. A bird like a swallow, which only eats small flying insects, it has no choice but to leave Ireland in the autumn to head to southern Africa to get a second summer, because there wouldn't be enough flies in Ireland or elsewhere in Europe to support them in the winter. And the sad fact is most swallows don't make it. Most swallows die on migration. But it's only really survival of the fittest. But if they stayed behind, they'd all die. Now, the blackbird has life a bit easier than that because it's more varied in its diet. In a natural setting in your garden, it likes to eat worms in the summer, and then it can switch to eating berries in the wintertime and fruits. And it also loves to eat seed at bird tables. So that's a great way to help those. Good seed blend, and particularly on the ground too. They'll often hop on the ground more than they'll go on the bird table. You'll probably see them, even if you look out your garden today, you'll see them hopping around on your lawn, turning their head from side to side, putting it as close to the ground as they can. And there's two reasons for doing that. One is that they're listening for worms. They want to have their ears close to the ground as possible so they can hear those worms tunneling through the surface. Now, whenever I show this picture in schools, the children always say to me, well, putting its ear close to the ground, I don't see any ear in that photograph. Do birds have ears at all? And the answer is yes, of course they do. Otherwise, there'd be no point in doing all that lovely singing that they do in the mornings. It's not for our benefit. It's to communicate with other birds. Birds' ears are very similar to ours. Now, the bit that we have on the outside of our skull, this what we call our ear, birds don't have that because it's not aerodynamic. It would cause problems when flying or for water birds when swimming. But the actual nuts and bolts of the ear, the important part inside the skull, the eardrum and on the nerves and everything, they do have that. It's very similar to ours, in fact, but you can't see it because it's covered by feathers. So there's a little hole in the side of their head covered by feathers. So a bird's ear are kind of roughly behind and below where its eyes are. Now, the other thing the blackbird is doing when it's scanning the surface of the soil is it's looking to see if it can see worms on the surface, or maybe a nice juicy spider or runnet or something like that. And to do that, it has to turn its whole head. Because if you look at where that bird's eyes are, they're very different to where our human eyes would be on our faces. For an animal, because we humans are animals after all, for an animal, our eyes are ridiculously close together, extremely close together. We can really only see what's right in front of us. For blackbirds and for most other birds, their eyes are much more widely spaced than that. It gives them a much better all-round field of view than we humans enjoy. So they can see almost all the way around them. That's why it's so difficult for young children to creep up on pigeons in streets. Urban pigeons, they see them coming. It's almost like having eyes in the back of your head. But to do that, they sacrifice the ability to see what's right in front of their beaks. So they have to turn their whole head in order to do that. Now, this bird, that beak is a perfect tool for plunging into the ground and taking out the worms, which they're hearing tunneling under the surface. It's not magic, they can actually hear them. And then in the autumn and the winter, it's a perfect tool then to switch to taking berries off bushes. And this bird has amazing eyesight. They can distinguish between different shades of red 40 times better than the human eye. And that's so they can determine when the berry is at peak ripeness, because after all, the bush or the tree wants its berries to be eaten by birds, insofar as a tree can want anything. And they've evolved that way because that's how their seeds are spread. When they eat the seed, it's in one end and out the other without being too indelicate. And when it comes out the other end, it's wrapped in a lovely package of fertilizer that helps it to grow. So the berries are kind of a bribe to the bird. So you can encourage these birds by planting lots of berry-rich bushes around your garden. Native tree species like rowan and holly work very well. You can also have some non-native but well-established garden plants like pyracantha and cotoneaster. They like those very much as well. And crab apples are another great source of food for these birds too. That's a way you can benefit them around your garden and help to keep them coming back day after day. Now, I mentioned that the blackbird is a member of the thrush family. Here's perhaps a more typical looking thrush, brown on the back, speckled on the front. It's the song thrush. Now, with this species, both the male and the female look identical. You can't tell them apart, unless you happen to see one singing. Because if it's singing, you can be sure it's a male. Because with the song thrush, as is the case with almost all Irish birds, just the male sings. There's one notable exception, which I'll show you shortly, but you can take as a general rule of thumb that just the male of most birds sing. And the song thrush, as its name would suggest, is one of our finest singers of all. And Birdwatch Ireland will have quite a few dawn chorus events coming up in early May, and I'm involved every year with Derek Mooney on the Mooney Goes Wild live dawn chorus broadcast, which will be coming to you actually from live, the main headquarters on the 1st of May, will be from Tuscany Marsh Nature Reserve in Cove. So good Cork stronghold there for us in the Birdwatch Ireland Nature Reserve, in fact. So looking forward to that. It's going to be on from midnight on the morning of the 1st of May. So set your alarm clocks for that. But anyway, the song thrush is one of the birds you'll certainly hear featured in that program. Why do birds sing? We often like to think or flatter ourselves that they're singing because they're happy or they're doing it for our enjoyment. That's not the case. The birds couldn't care less what we think of their songs. They're doing it for themselves. And what they do is, but rather than being something beautiful or because they're calm and relaxed, it's a very stressful, aggressive thing. When a bird is singing, he's basically shouting abuse at all of the neighboring males of his species and warning them. It's really threatening, telling them, this is my territory. If you dare cross into my territory, I'm going to try and kill you. That's what's happening essentially. Now, luckily, birds can judge each other's strengths and weaknesses by the song. And so a male that can spend most of his day singing loudly and with a strong voice, it's a sign that he must be in good physical condition. He's very fit and healthy. He has plenty of food in his territory. He's not someone you'd want to tackle because you could end up in a lot of trouble there. So he'll get the best territory. And a bird with a weak song or that's kind of very poor, low voice, it might not get any territory at all. The other thing that the bird is doing is that the male is he's sending a signal to all the females in the area saying that his territory is available if she'd like to come and check it out. And she'll be impressed by the male who, I suppose, for want of a better expression, can waste the better part of his day singing, because when he's singing, it shows that he's fit and healthy. He's also not trying to hide from predators. He's showing off his position to every predator. It's kind of a bravado, macho thing to do. So she'll be impressed by that. It proves that his territory must be good and he's strong and healthy. So he'd make a good provider for her and any chicks they might have together. And also it's a sign that he has good genetic material. So he'd make a good father on that score as well. Her offspring would inherit his strong genes. So that's what's going on with birdsong. Now, birds sing in a very strict order. The birds with the largest eyes start to sing earliest in the morning. And this only really happens from spring onwards. Most birds sing only in the spring and the early part of the summer. They don't sing year round, again, with one exception, which I'll show you shortly. And you can see this song thrush here. Its eye is very large. And that means that it'll start singing just at the very first glimmer of light in the sky. You might think, why would that be the case? Well, the larger the eye, the more light it gathers, so the better they can see in low light levels. And a bird isn't confident enough to start singing unless there's enough light so it can see predators coming, like a fox or a hawk or a cat. Because when it's singing, it's giving away its location, so the predator knows exactly where it is. So that's why birds with big eyes sing earliest in the morning and latest in the evening. Now, song thrushes, they're a real gardener's friend. They love to eat snails. They eat berries and worms as well, like the blackbird does too, but they love to eat snails most of all. And they're the only bird that, I suppose, if you pardon the expression or pardon the pun, has cracked it. Because snail shells are too strong for birds' beak to break. So what the song thrush does, it goes around and picks them up and finds a stone or maybe a patio slab, bashes the shell on there until it breaks open, and then it can eat the snail inside. It seems obvious to us, but no other bird has worked that out. So what's happened with the song thrush then is that there's lots of snails. It has them all. It has them all to themselves. So it reduces competition. It's all about all of life for wild animals is reducing competition, finding your own niche. So where you get lots of snails, you get lots of song thrushes. However, that can be their downfall as well, because overuse of certain types of pesticides and certain types of slug pellets that poison the slugs and snails has had a knock-on effect on song thrushes. If they eat a poisoned snail or they feed it to their chicks, they can get very sick, or if they eat too many, they can actually die. So much better to do it in an environmentally friendly way. Get some flat stones. We call them thrush anvils because they use them to bash the shells open on. Dot them around your garden in sort of semi-secluded locations, and let the song thrush come in and clean the snails out for you. They're very efficient at it. But if you do that, do it today. And if, over the coming weeks, what you'll see is if you leave the broken snail shell fragments there, you'll see lots of other birds of different species coming down and actually swallowing those fragments of snail shell that the song thrush has left behind. And what those are female birds who in a few weeks' time are going to have to lay lots of eggs. And eggshells are made of calcium carbonate, the same substance that snail shells are made of. And so then to get enough calcium in their diet, they need to eat those snail shells. So the song thrush is inadvertently benefiting all the other birds in your garden. And I love that kind of that interconnectedness that you get in gardens. It's a great thing to show children particularly, because it really gives them a real clue as to how the world works and how everything is connected. I think we humans have an overly simplistic view of the world, and we don't realize that our gardens are ecosystems that we have control over, and we can make them more hospitable for birds like song thrushes. So I really would urge you to do that. Now, another member of the same family is the missel thrush. The missel thrush, it's a bird that tends to favor large lawns with high trees nearby. They'll often go sing from the top of the highest tree that they can find. A really sort of wild, loud song, really sort of it's a sound of like a really sort of abandon. It's a really sort of flowing bird song, very, very nice. So the missel thrush and the song thrush, they look very similar to each other. They have similar habits too. The missel thrush doesn't eat snails, just the song thrush does that, but they do compete for berries. And indeed, the missel thrush is named after its favorite food, the mistletoe plant. That's where the name comes from. There's a couple of ways you can tell them apart. Both are speckled on the front and brown on the back, but they have a different stance. The missel thrush always stands with its head aloft. The chest is thrust out like a soldier on parade showing off their medals. The song thrush, if I go back to it here, it's different. It has its head down, shoulders up. It kind of looks like it's feeling guilty or it's up to something. It doesn't want you to notice what it's just done, that kind of thing. So it's much more secretive. They're speckled on the front, brown on the back, but the tone of the brown is different. If you look at the brown on the song thrush, there's a rufous tone to it, a kind of russet. Whereas on the missel thrush, it's a grey, cold cast to it. It's not red. There's no reddish tones there at all. The spots are different too. They're very circular on a missel thrush. It looks like they've been dabbed on individually with a paintbrush. Back to the song thrush, the spots aren't circular at all. They're little arrowheads or upside down heart shapes with a little peak at the top and a notch at the bottom. So it's quite different. If you have a pair of binoculars even on your kitchen windowsill, you'll see that difference quite easily in your garden. But probably the best way to tell them apart is by their size. The song thrush is always smaller than a blackbird, using that as a reference, and the missel thrush is larger than a blackbird. So you saw the two side by side, the missel thrush looks substantially larger. That's the easiest way to tell them apart. Now, another type of thrush we get is this. This is the fieldfare. And unlike the previous three that we saw, which are present year round, the fieldfare only comes to us in the wintertime. And they come in big flocks to us from Scandinavia and from Eastern Europe. If you go sort of Poland eastward, this is the common thrush in the summer of parks. So if you go to places like Warsaw, St. Petersburg, Moscow, this is the common urban park thrush. And you get them in lots of forests as well and wild areas too. They stay there in the summer, but those parts of the world get very, very cold in the winter. So these birds migrate. And rather than heading south, the way a lot of birds would for migration, these birds head west and they come to places like Britain and Ireland. And we can get big influxes. They're almost always in flocks. Similar to a missel thrush in an overall size and shape, but you can see it has a grey head, a grey rump or lower back, which is quite different. And also doesn't have spots on the chest. It has these little chevron shapes, which are very, very different. And these birds, especially in cold weather, we haven't had a very cold winter so far, but if we get lots of snow and ice, they come to gardens in big numbers. And unfortunately, because they're not used to garden bird tables, they're not aware that the bird food that we put out in feeders or on the ground is edible. They don't know what that is. And we've had cases of sometimes flocks of hundreds or even thousands of these birds starving to death, despite the fact there's been food all around them, because they haven't realized it's edible. Birds have to learn that. However, there is one thing you can do to help these birds, and it's a great thing to do in your garden, and this picture will give you the clue. You can see at the bottom of the picture, there's an apple on the branch, and at the very top above the bird's head, there's a pear. Putting apples and pears and fruits like that onto branches is a real lifeline for these birds in bad weather, because they recognize what those are, because in the wild they're used to eating crab apples, and they realize a domestic eating apple is just a large crab apple, which actually is exactly what it is. So they realize, oh, that's food, I can eat that. When they eat it, it's full of sugar, and they do really well. So that's a real lifeline for these birds. You can put them on branches or you can put them on the lawn, and that's a good way to help these birds really survive very cold winter days. Wherever you get fieldfares in the winter, you also get this, our smallest thrush, the redwing. Again, this is a winter visitor, and you only find them in the winter. Some of them come to us from Scandinavia, but the majority come to us from Iceland. And they migrate here in October, and they usually stay with us until March, when they then fly back to Iceland. And amazingly, they do that migration in one go in just a few hours. So in October, what happens is they leave Iceland when the sun is setting, and by the following morning, they've arrived in Ireland. And they fly in flocks when they come to us. So it's something to watch out for. You see them hopping around on lawns or on open playing fields. Like the other thrushes, speckled on the front, brown on the back. You can see that flash of red on the side of the body. Sometimes people call us and say there's a badly injured bird in their garden. It looks like it's bleeding very badly. Like, that's not blood, that's just the color of the feathers. And if it lifted its wing, the underside of its wing is red as well, hence the name redwing. But that can be hard to see. Probably the best way to identify them, even at a distance, is to look at that stripe over the eye, that pale eyebrow that they have. No other thrush in Ireland has that, and it's very distinctive even from a long distance. So that's a good way to tell them apart. And you can see it's a bit more compact than the other thrushes with a shorter tail. It's definitely even smaller than a song thrush. So that's our smallest of our thrushes. Again, only found here in the winter and usually in flocks with the previous bird with the fieldfare. Now, I couldn't give a talk on garden birds without mentioning the robin. I think you'd all be very upset. It's everyone's favorite garden bird, certainly mine. They're absolutely lovely. I think if robins didn't exist, Birdwatch Ireland would have to invent them because they're the perfect one bird poster campaign for bird conservation, for the joys of nature. I think that robins have brought more people to an appreciation of wilderness and of wild birds than any other creature. And not surprising, they're very charming, they're very tame around people, they're beautiful to look at, and they sound beautiful. Now, we get more phone calls and letters and emails and social media posts about robins than any other bird. Literally, we get about 15 to 20 a day, and especially at this time of year. And many of them, they kind of go the same way. People say to us, I've had the same robin coming into my garden every day now for the last 20 years. He's such a friendly little chap. Now, if you're one of those people, I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you. Robins could never live for 20 years. In fact, if a robin makes it to the age of 3, it's doing well. 3 is old age for a robin. And indeed, the majority of the chicks never live to see their first birthday. So life for many of our birds is much shorter than you would think. So we break this news to people as gently as we can, but the response is always the same. They say, well, I know that's the average, but my guy is different. Sure, when I'm in the garden digging, he hops around behind me looking for worms. And when we had a really cold winter there a few years ago and there was snow on the ground, he came to my window and actually came looking for food, and he came and landed on my hand. And the thing is, not to burst too many bubbles, but there's nothing special about your robin in doing that. All robins do that. In the same way that the song thrush reduces competition by being the only bird that can feed on snails in your garden, so the robin reduces competition by really being the only bird that will come and take food that's close to human beings. They'll approach us more closely than other birds will. They've learned that we're not so bad, and they've evolved to associate with other species that can provide food. And we humans, we like to flatter ourselves and to think that that means the bird is being friendly and that it likes us. And again, I don't want to burst too many bubbles again, but that birds don't think in that way. We're an easy meal ticket. They're exploiting us. They're realizing, well, this foolish human is here and is just letting this food go to waste, and no other bird is brave enough to come and take it. That blackbird isn't brave enough, certainly. So I'll come and take it myself. And if I hang around near this human, I'll be protected from predators as well. And of course, we're happy to let them do that because they're so colorful. They're beautiful birds. They also sound beautiful as well. But far from being friendly, the robin is actually one of the most aggressive birds in our gardens. While they quite like humans, they don't like other robins. During the breeding season, the male and female will obviously come together to mate and raise their chicks. It takes 2 to tango. But outside the breeding season, in the late summer and into the autumn, and now in winter, they go their separate ways. The male and the female robin keep separate territories from each other, and that means that the robin breaks a lot of the rules about song. So with the robin, both the male and the female sing. And this picture here, you couldn't tell if it's a male or a female. They look utterly identical. There's absolutely no way to tell. And even if you see one singing, you couldn't be sure with this species if it's a male or a female because both sing. And also, they sing all year round because they keep a territory all year round. Most birds just have a territory in the nesting season, the spring and the summer, but robins keep a territory in the non-breeding season as well. And they're very antisocial. If another robin tries to come too close to a robin in your garden, they'll fight. They'll try to kill each other. And they sometimes fight to the death. But again, most of that fighting can be done through their songs by judging who'd be the strongest. So that's the way that robins live. So their lives are quite interesting. And there's a lot more to them than meets the eye. But again, charming little bird, and one I certainly that we should continue to enjoy. Another charming little bird, and one that's present in most gardens in Ireland, is the wren. A lot of people don't realize they have wrens because they are so small, the second smallest bird in Ireland, and they're so camouflaged, and they have a skulking little habit. They hide in the bushes, creep around like little mouse on the ground underneath the bushes and the hedges. It's rare to see one come out to the open as clearly as we see in this picture here. Now, wrens, male and female, look identical, but we can be sure this is a male because he's singing in this photograph. Only the male sings. He follows the usual rule. And we can also tell a lot about this bird by its beak shape. That beak is the long, thin, pointed beak. It's no good for digging in the ground, no good for crushing seed. Perfect as a tool to use like a pair of tweezers to take insects off of leaves and under branches. So this is a great bird to have to clear out like pest insects you might have in your garden. But that means that survival for this bird is very tough. Because look at those little wings, they're not going to carry it anywhere. Most of our insect-eating birds, like the swallow, they migrate away. But this wren couldn't migrate far at all. Its wings are too small. So it's kind of stuck in and around your garden. Even on the coldest day of the year, this bird has to find insects. So the way you help a wren is you plant a lot of cover plants, particularly a mixture of native plants that will attract native insects, and then some evergreen plants that will provide cover, particularly in the winter, where insects will shelter and where the wren can hide from cold weather. And despite the fact that this bird, existence must be very tough for it, it actually is doing very well in Ireland. There are more wrens in Ireland than human beings. They outnumber us. There are probably about 7 million of them on this island, maybe more. It's hard to assess them or count them, but that's what we think from our surveys. And so it's amazing, and you definitely have them near your garden. In your garden, they're found in also more habitats than any other bird. Not just your garden. Everywhere in Ireland, you find wrens: forests, bogs, farms, islands, cliffs. All of these places, you find wren. Reed beds. Everywhere you get them. And the way to identify them and realize how common they are is to know their song. Coming into the breeding season now, you'll hear the song of the wren. For such a tiny bird, it's incredibly loud. One of the loudest bird songs you'll hear. You'll almost jump with fright if one starts to sing in a bush beside you and you didn't know it was there. What they do is they'll start to sing, and it's a jumble of notes, very, very fast. It lasts about 2 seconds. But in that 2 seconds, there's more than 200 different notes. You couldn't count the notes, it's far too fast. So very loud, very fast song, full of energy. That's the wren. That's how you identify them. People know the wren, though. There's lots of stories about it, myth and legend. If you think about the story of the king of the birds, it's supposed to have cheated in the competition by riding on the back of the eagle. And then it's also the association with St. Stephen's Day and the wren boys, the ram boys. So people know this bird a lot in myth and legend. So it makes me feel quite sorry for the next bird, the dunnock, which is almost as common as the wren. You find them everywhere. I guarantee you all had these in your garden at some point during this winter. But people don't notice it. It's not famous at all. It kind of slips below the radar. I mean, if you look at it there, I mean, no offense to the dunnock, but it's not much to write home about. It's not very colorful. It's a brown and gray streaky little thing. And also it's not much to listen to either. The song is very thin and scratchy and quite weak. I'm sure to a female dunnock it sounds amazing, but to human ears, you kind of dismiss it. You wouldn't even register it. And that's the secret of this bird's success. You don't notice it, and the predators don't notice it either. So it can hide away in the bushes, creep around again like a little mouse, the way the wren does, rarely comes out into the open, and doesn't draw attention to itself, and you don't notice it. So with this bird, you know, it's a bird that can benefit a little bit from bird tables too. They won't really go to feed on the bird tables, but at dusk, any scraps that have fallen on the floor from the bird table or on the ground, it'll sometimes nip out and grab them when it thinks no one's looking. So put a little brown streaky thing on the ground and see if you can see that there. Now the dunnock, it used to be known by a different name, which you might know it better by. This is the bird that used to be called the hedge sparrow. So if you've heard of a hedge sparrow, this is the dunnock. Now that name has fallen out of favor. It's an old Victorian era name for it, but it's not used anymore because although the dunnock does love hedges, it's not a sparrow. I have a proper sparrow to show you in a few minutes. And the dunnock, sparrows have big beaks for crushing seed. The dunnock doesn't. It has a thin little beak for eating insects. And its favorite food are green flies. So if you have roses or other plants like that in your garden, the dunnock is your friend. You want this bird around. So a new name was tried. They tried the name hedge excenter because it's a member of the excenter family. Birds that live mostly in high mountains, except for the dunnock, which lives in gardens. But that name fell out of favor because let's face it, that's a terrible name for anything. And so a new name was needed, and dunnock was what was settled on. And that's one that we should be very proud of here in Ireland because it means it's the only bird where the name in English is derived from the Irish language. The Irish name for this bird is dunogue, which means little brown thing, little brown fella. Perfect description. A lot of the Irish names are very descriptive and evocative. And so great name for it. So that's a bird we should be proud of, the dunnock, a real gardener's friend. Here's an interesting species to show you. Now, if I was doing a talk on garden birds 10 or 15 years ago, I wouldn't have included this species, the blackcap. You can see where it got its name, this black cap on top of its head, grey below, kind of grey with beigey wings and black cap on the head. And that's what the male looks like at least. I'll show you the female now in a sec. But something interesting happened with this bird. It used to be just a summer visitor to Ireland. If you look at most field guides that were published 15, 20 years ago, they'll say blackcap, just a summer visitor to Ireland where it lives in woodland, has a beautiful song, one of our finest singers, but wouldn't really come into a garden unless you have a big garden and lots of trees. It's mostly in woodland and orchards sometimes. However, we do a survey every winter called the Irish Garden Bird Survey. When I say we do it, lovely people like yourselves do it. We have thousands of people all over Ireland for a 12-week period each winter taking part in this survey, or even 13 weeks this year. And for the start of December to the end of February, it's nearly over now. And what we've seen, we're doing it for 34 years now, and we've gone from seeing no blackcaps whatsoever in the winter survey to seeing them in many gardens. It keeps opening up more and more each year. This is strange. This bird is supposed to be heading to the Mediterranean for the winter. What's going on? They're migrants. And it turns out they are. Our summer blackcaps are still migrating as normal down to the Mediterranean. They go to North Africa and to Spain, places like that. And what's happening is we're getting a separate population coming from Central Europe, from the region of roughly Germany, Poland, that kind of area. And they're migrating to Ireland and also to Britain now in increasing numbers. It's a different population. The two never meet each other. And that's very strange because that population also used to head south until quite recently, they would head south to the Mediterranean. And it seems what happened was a population there of them, some individuals in that part of Germany or Poland a few years ago suffered some sort of genetic mutation. Birds, when they migrate, they have genes that control this. And a bird like a blackcap, we know they go a set distance and a set direction. So they would fly south and a certain distance. And what happened is it seemed the gene went wrong, and instead of going south, they went sort of northwest by accident and went the wrong way. And luckily for them, they're a short distance migrant. If they were a bird like a swallow or a willow warbler that goes to sub-Saharan Africa, if they went the wrong direction but the correct distance, by the time that little timer went off and stopped them, they'd be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean where there's no land and they would die. Luckily, the blackcap, by coincidence, it brought them to Ireland and Britain, where they found gardens and they found peanut feeders like you see here. And these were a lifeline for these birds. They managed to thrive, and they relied very much on peanuts, also ivy berries and suet in the winter. A great way to help these birds. And so not only did they survive, they managed to thrive. They did better than the birds that went the right way. And so when these birds then returned to Central Europe back in the springtime to breed, they got back earlier because they were fitter. And they got the best territories because they were stronger. And they were more attractive to the opposite sex because they had more going for them. They were in better health. And therefore, they were more likely to succeed when breeding. And so they had more chicks than the normal blackcaps, let's call them. And that means that more of those chicks inherited this mutant gene. And then they migrated to Britain and Ireland, and they succeeded and thrived and headed back and were more successful breeding. This went on for several generations, a bird generation being 1 year, of course. And then rather rapidly what happened was the wrong gene became the right gene because it was giving them a survival advantage over the other birds. And so now more and more of the population are heading to Ireland. And this is evolution happening before our eyes. We think of evolution often as being something that happened millions of years ago to dinosaurs, and it did, but evolution never stops. It's going on all around us. Right as I'm speaking to you, evolution is happening. And it's rare we get to see it happening in our lifetimes, but with the blackcap we are. And this continues for a few thousand more years, maybe 10,000 up to 100,000 years. What will happen is this will become a new species. That's how it happens. And they'll change in appearance and they'll differ from the other blackcaps. So I find that fascinating anyway. So peanuts are a real lifeline for these birds. When it comes to feeding peanuts to birds, by the way, you want to make sure you buy high quality ones and you don't let them go moldy, because mold on peanuts it's toxic to birds. It's extremely toxic, actually. Not harmful to humans, but bad for birds. And also, when you're doing feeding peanuts, put them in these wire mesh feeders. Never put them out loose. When they're out loose, you see birds can choke on them. They can easily choke on a peanut. But when they're in the wire mesh, they can just take a beakful at a time, and there's no risk of choking. Anyway, so here's the male blackcap with the black on top of his head. This is what the female looks like. She's exactly the same, except she has a rusty red cap on top of her head. And we get complaints every year about these blackcaps now in people's gardens because people think they're beautiful to look at, and they are, but they're extremely aggressive. They get upset when they're chasing the other birds away. And if you have a bird feeder, they will try chase the other birds away from them very aggressively. Your robin, your blue tits, they will try to drive them away. And people don't like this. They don't like it when they see birds as being mean. They want everyone to get on. And again, we humans can be very naive about this. The blackcap doesn't care about the survival of your robin or your blackbird or your blue tit. In fact, as far as the blackcap is concerned, better if those birds die because it's less competition for it. It only cares about itself. And it sees a source of food there, and it knows its existence is precarious because it has evolved to winter in warmer areas. The food we provide in our gardens are a lifeline that allow it to survive, but it's worried about that food disappearing. So in the natural setting, it has evolved to defend food supplies from other birds because otherwise it will die. We humans, again, not to be too cynical about it, but I blame a lot of childhood stories. We all like to think that all the woodland creatures are friends and want to help each other. That's not the way nature works. They're ruthless. Nature is ruthless. And that's what blackcaps want to do. They want to drive away competition. So when they're in your garden doing that, that's the way they behave. There's nothing we can do about it. We shouldn't interfere. That's the way it goes. Now, another bird that we get a lot now into gardens in increasing numbers is the chaffinch. The chaffinch perhaps is Ireland's most numerous bird. There are probably 8 million of them in Ireland at the moment, maybe even more, because you get influx in the winter of migrant chaffinches that join our breeding population to stay with us year round. The chaffinch, one of our most colourful birds, and you can see here, this is the male, blue cap on his head, pinkish red face and chest, brownish back. The bit of his back that's covered by his folded wings is actually bright green. So you see that when he flies away. The female, same size and shape, but she's different shades of beige. She's more camouflaged than he is, with some lovely striping in the back of her head. And if you want to attract this bird into your garden, there's one easy way. And again, that's to know what kind of food it eats. And that beak tells me exactly what kind of food it eats. That short, stubby, wide, conical beak, that is for crushing seed. And this bird's favorite food is sunflower seed. If you put sunflower seeds in a feeder in your garden, or you can scatter them on the ground if you prefer, but these birds are agile, will go to feeders as well, and they'll really love those. You can get big flocks in, and you'll realize they're actually a common bird. And they usually come in groups, so you don't usually just see one at a time. They're often in groups together, and quite easy to identify. From a distance, one of the best ways to identify them is to look for those white striping in the wing, those big white areas in the wing. Not many garden birds have that, so that's a good way to tell them apart. The Irish name for this bird is lovely, by the way. The Irish name is Rí Rua, which means red king. Again, a lot of the Irish names being very evocative and descriptive. Another member of the finch family is the greenfinch. Really the only bright green bird you'll see in your garden, unless maybe your neighbour's parrot has escaped or something like that. People often, whenever I go to schools, people always say when they look at this bird here, they think it looks very grumpy and angry. And again, that's us humans projecting our own emotions onto these birds. It has a big beak and has a grey patch in front of its face, in front of its eye, or sort of greyish black patch that makes it look like it's scowling. But again, it's not, it just feels the same as every other bird. It just happens to look like that. You can see it's not entirely green. It has yellow in the wing and in the tail. It has lovely pink legs and the palest pink bill imaginable. It looks almost white from a distance, but up close you see it's actually very, very, very pale pink. The female is very similar. She's also green, but more olive tone. It's more of a brownish cast to the green, but you'd still look at her and say that's a green coloured bird. Now, this bird loves seed. That beak tells us that too, and they'll eat lots of mixed seed. They have a strong beak, and even harder seeds than the other birds, the other finches can. It's a bit of a problem with them, though. We've been seeing a real downward trend in this bird. They've gone down by about 50% over just the last 10 years. And the thing is, it's actually a reason that we humans can relate to. They have their own disease pandemic going on. So we have COVID. They have a disease called trichomoniasis. It's been going on for 10 or so years now, and it sort of comes and goes a little bit. It's very bad at the moment, and it's very virulent among finch populations. So it's important to keep your bird feeders clean. And if you see any sick finches in your garden, stop feeding the birds for about 3 weeks. Awful as it sounds, that's to allow time for the infected birds to die, so they're not reinfecting the food, or and passing on to the flock. There's no cure for this. 90% of the birds that get it die. There's nothing can be done about it. Now, just to reassure you, there's no risk to humans. Humans, and indeed any of our fellow mammals, we can't catch it. So dogs, cats, guinea pigs, rabbits, cows, sheep, horses, none of us can catch this disease. Most birds can't get it either. Your blue tits, your robins, your blackbirds are all perfectly safe. It's really the finches that get it worst, but the greenfinches in particular, because they have a thing, they live in flocks, and to strengthen the flock bond, they pass food from beak to beak. When they do that, they pass the infection. It's not actually a bacteria or a bacterium or a virus. It's actually a weird little single-celled organism, a protozoan, like an amoeba, if you know those things. And they cause swellings in the bird's throat that eventually get so bad that they block off the food, the digestive system, the esophagus, and the birds can no longer swallow food and they starve to death. So it's a horrible death. So if you do see dead or sick greenfinches in your garden, do let us know, and check our website, birdwatchern.ie, for advice on what to do. But again, just to reassure you, no risks to people. So we don't have to worry about it from a human health point of view at all. Not all doom and gloom. Here's a real success story. This is the goldfinch, one of our most colorful garden birds, and really increasing. The garden bird survey that I mentioned to you, and we've been doing it for over 30 years now. When we started it, this gorgeous creature was present only in 4% of the gardens in the survey. Last winter, it was present in almost 84% of the gardens. So it's gone way up in the space of just 3 decades. And garden feeders have been a real source of, a real reason for that, because this bird loves to eat the seeds of thistles and teasels. It's standing on a teasel here, a lovely garden plant. If you plant this in your garden, it's an attractive plant, and goldfinches absolutely love them. You can see it's covered in spines. And that beak has evolved to reach in between the spines to take out the seeds and then crush them with a strong base. The other finches can't do that. The beak is too blunt, and so they run the risk of getting a spine in their eye. So they can't do that. But you can mimic that in your garden by putting up a seed called Niger seed in the garden. I have a photograph of that showing in a minute. And also, this bird loves to eat peanuts, because as luck would have it, that beak, which is perfect size and shape for eating the thistle seeds, it's also the perfect size and shape to reach between the little mesh openings where the peanuts are. Now, if you look at this bird, it's very easy to identify. It's got a lovely scarlet on the face, black and white head pattern. On the front, it looks like it's wearing a little orangey beige waistcoat. And then it has this flash of lovely yellow. What an intense yellow that is, pure yellow in the wing. And then I love the wing pattern particularly. Jet black wings, say, for a little white dot at the tip of each wing feather, which I think is really attractive. So identifying them is very easy. And if you put up Niger seed and in your garden, or plant teasels, you pretty much guarantee these birds will come in at some stage. And who wouldn't want to have this in their garden? The Irish name for this is beautiful. The Irish name is Los Arquilla, which means flame of the woods, on account of the colours of fire in the plumage. You see them flying along to the edge of a woodland. It does look like flames licking the branches, and so as in a sort of poetic license kind of way. And so Los Arquilla, flame of the woods. This is the siskin, tiny little finch. You can see this wonderful greenish yellow color. The females are browner and more streaky. This is the male, the black cap on his head, greenish yellow body. Love to eat peanuts, love to eat Niger seed. Again, you can see best practice here using the wire mesh feeder for the peanuts. And these birds, one way you can identify them is they're always upside down on the feeders. They always have their heads pointing towards the ground and their tail sticking up. The other birds have the tail pointing down. And the reason for that is that this bird, it mainly spends most of its time in coniferous forests. It loves spruce and pine plantations and also mixed woodland, where they feed on pine cones and spruce cones, and they hang off the branches of the tree. So to reach those, what the siskins have to do, they hang upside down off the branches or at the top of the cone and reach in underneath with their beak. So they've adapted to feed upside down. That's how they eat. And most of the year, there's enough food in those forests to keep them going. But sort of from mid-January onwards through into February, so now's the peak time for them, that's when they suddenly arrive in gardens. So they're absent most of the time, and then mid-January onwards through to the end of February, they suddenly appear out of nowhere and then disappear again in March. So hopefully some of you are seeing these now at the moment in your gardens. Some years are better for others than others southern gardens, because if there's a bumper kind of conifer cone crop, these birds don't have to move into gardens. But most years it runs out of food, usually around January, and they come in. So that's the siskin. This is the redpoll. This redpoll now is feeding on this famous Niger seeds that I mentioned earlier. It's spelled N-Y-J-E-R. You can see it needs a special kind of feeder for it, because that seed is so fine that it would pour out of a normal feeder very easily, like liquid. And this is particularly good for small birds like this redpoll that like to feed on small seeds. You can see it's got it there in its beak. It's manipulating it with its little tongue. It's getting it sideways. It's going to crunch that with the sides of its beak, which are very sharp and strong, break it open, take out the kernel inside with its tongue, and spit out the seed husk. Sometimes people think that the birds are spilling all the seed on the ground. Many cases what's happening is they're just shelling it and getting rid of the shells in some cases. If you do find birds genuinely throwing loads of seed onto the ground from your feeder, it's usually a sign that it's a poorer quality seed mix. It's full of filler that the birds don't want. So as a rule of thumb, avoid anything that has dried peas in it. That's my classic indication that the manufacturers put filler in bird feed. No bird wants to eat dried peas. They're just there because they're cheap and they bulk up the weight. They'll fling them all on the ground. So that's a rule of thumb. And if you see the birds throwing a lot of food out, change to a different brand or a different type of bird food. But don't be fooled if they're just throwing the husks away. That's perfectly normal. They don't swallow the whole seed. Now the redpoll, you can see lovely pinkish red on the chest, very, very small little bird. Brown except for a couple of white stripes on the wing. This lovely red forehead that gives it its name. Poll, P-O-L-L, that's an old word for forehead. That's where an opinion poll or an election poll comes from. It used to be a count of foreheads, a head count means a poll. So that's where redpoll comes from. So a lovely, charming little bird that you'll see you'll see in the gardens, especially this time of year. Another finch here. This is the bullfinch. Colorful bird. This is the male, black cap on the head, pinkish red on the chest, gray on the back, gray wing stripe in the black wing. The tail there, the underneath is white, but also the lower back is white. It looks like it has a sugar cube or sugar lump on the back of its tail, on the back of its lower back, and then a jet black tail. The female is very similar, but she's beige below and above, still with a black cap and black wing and white rump. But the thing is, they're never far apart. All year round, the male and female bullfinch stay together. So if you see one, and you usually see the male first because he's the most colorful, the female will just be a few feet away. She's always with him. Now, this bird, at this time of year, it's a bumper time for them because their favorite food is just emerging at the moment. They love to eat tree blossom. So if you have cherry trees or plum trees or apple trees in your garden, you'll see this bird coming in to eat the blossom. Now, the bad news there is every flower that they eat means one less apple or one less plum because they've eaten the bud. But what I like to do is planting ornamental cherries or plums in your garden, a great way to attract these birds in, just for a brief period, a couple of weeks in the spring, and they come and feed on those. They're nectar rich. And that beak there, you can see it's like a secateurs to chop off the flower buds, and that's what they eat. They also love to eat dandelion seeds. So if you can bear letting the dandelions on your lawn go to seed, these birds will come in and they'll feed on those dandelion seeds very happily. It's a great way you can attract them to feeders too. We used to think that this bird wouldn't really come to bird feeders, but that's changing. And that's because they found a food they love. They love to eat a product called sunflower hearts. Now that's a fancy name for pre-shelled sunflower seeds. Sunflower seeds that the husks have already been taken off. Because this bird's beak isn't quite strong enough to break open the sunflower seed shell, but if they're pre-shelled for them, they'll eat them. They go through them in huge numbers. And indeed, sunflower seeds, shelled sunflower seeds or sunflower hearts are great for all sorts of birds that couldn't normally eat seeds. And sunflower seeds are great for birds because they're full of oil. I think of sunflower oil. That's where they come from. So that oil is calories, and that's what birds need to keep warm in cold winter nights. If they have enough food, they can keep warm in ridiculous temperatures. So that's something you can do. And something you can do is great with children as well. Plant a few sunflowers in your garden. We know they're great plants. They grow extremely tall. They turn to follow the sun, hence the name. As you can see where the sun is in the sky. But when they go to seed, birds like this will come in, and other finches too. They'll feed on the seeds in the seed head on the flower. So I think it's beautiful. Or indeed, you can cut off the seed heads and hang them on your bird table. Now, this is the house sparrow. Earlier I told you about the dunnock, the hedge sparrow, the sparrow that isn't a sparrow at all. This bird is a sparrow. That big strong beak for crushing seed tells us that. And male and female are quite different. Same sort of body, but the male's head is different. He has grey on top of his head, dark chestnut on the back of the head, sort of dark stripe through the eye, black beak. It gets a bit more yellowish in the winter, and breeding plumage is black on the beak. But then on the front, you can just see there, he has this sort of black bib, almost like a beard, that comes down onto his chest. And for some of them, it's just a little chin patch. For some, it goes all the way down the chest. And that tells us a lot about the hierarchy of this bird, because only the males have this. The females have just a brown streaky head with no black on them at all. And these birds don't have territories the way that most birds do. They live in colonies. The more the merrier. They want to live together in groups. And so they respond very well to nest boxes. You put lots of nest boxes together, that can help them to nest. And they find it hard nesting because modern buildings, they nest in houses usually, have fewer little holes and gaps in the brickwork for them to nest. So you can help them with nest boxes. So anyway, what happens is, rather than having territories, they have a pecking order. And the dominant males are the ones that have the largest black bibs. And that bib is controlled by a hormone, actually testosterone. And the more testosterone the bird has, the bigger that black bib will be, and also the more aggressive it will be. Less birds are less likely to fight it. And also, the bigger the black bib, the more attractive a female will find that bird. So they will always go for the males that have the biggest bibs if they can get them. So that's really interesting. This dynamic is going on with the seemingly simple little bird that hops around in our gardens. These birds have declined quite a lot. It's now a bird I associate very much with urban areas and with suburban gardens. In a lot of rural Ireland, this bird has disappeared. And the reason for that has been a decline in tillage farming, destruction of hedgerows, and also a less reliance on horses than we did, let's say, in the 19th and the earliest part of the 20th century. And that was boom time for this bird, because whether you have horses, there's lots of spilled grain, and there's also lots of horse dung on the streets, and that has shells and undigested seeds in it too, and the house sparrows would go through the dung. Anyway, so that's the house sparrow, a charming bird. Very boring little song, just make a little chirp chirp noise over and over, but there's something endearing about them as far as I'm concerned. This is the blue tit, one of our most familiar garden birds, a bird that absolutely loves peanuts and also loves nest boxes. So now's a good time for me to talk about nest boxes for you. You can see a lot of nest boxes. They come in all sorts of different designs and shapes. And the fact is, it doesn't really matter what they look like, so long as they meet the basic requirements of the bird. I don't like nest boxes where it's all form over function. Function is key, and that's what the blue tit wants. So a bird like this, they want to have a box that's nice and sturdy, well insulated, so thick wood that keeps it, doesn't get too hot or too cold. They want to have a sloping roof so that any water that falls on it will drain off. You want to have that roof overhanging the hole on the front of it so the water won't go in. And you want to have drainage holes in the bottom of the box. So when water does get in, because it will inevitably a little bit, it'll drain out and the box won't fill up with water. And also it allows air to circulate, so it'll air dry as well. And you want to have the hole the right size as well. For the blue tit, you want the hole to be 25 millimeters in diameter. That's an inch across. Looks tiny. When you see it in a box, you think that's far too small. And people often, when they're building nest boxes where they're buying them, they tend to go for the larger entrance holes because they think, well, that bird could never fit through such a small hole. But it can, and that's what it wants. When you see a bird like a blue tit, when it puffs itself up like this, what you're seeing is mostly feathers and air. Underneath there, the bird's body, its muscles and its skeleton are tiny. They could easily squeeze through a gap of an inch, no problem. And a bird like a blue tit isn't happy to nest inside a cavity where the hole is big enough to let a more dominant species fit in, because it'll evict it. So that's the key to success. Make sure the hole isn't too big. We have lots of information at birdwatchireland.ie about nest boxes, or how you can build your own, or indeed you can buy them from the co-op. I know that they have a great range in stock. You can buy them from Birdwatch Ireland too if you like. Now the blue tit, charming little birds hopping around in our gardens. We don't realize sometimes though just how valuable they are to us as gardeners. We have about 1.1 million pairs of blue tits getting ready to nest. They usually nest in late April, early May. Unlike most birds, like robins that nest twice and blackbirds, they nest only once each year, only one brood of chicks, and they kind of time their breeding with the emergence of caterpillars. And so we have 1.1 million pairs of these birds nesting simultaneously in Ireland. And during a 2-week period, when their chicks are growing, they go from being out of the egg to being fully grown in just about 2 weeks. It's amazing how fast they grow. To fuel that growth, their parents need to find, for each family, they need to find a minimum of 10,000 caterpillars each. Multiply that by 1.1 million pairs in the space of 2 weeks, and you realize how many caterpillars these birds are eating. And their favorite caterpillars are those green caterpillars that destroy our cabbages, the ones with the cabbage white butterfly. If it wasn't for blue tits, just think what would happen in your garden and what would happen to agriculture. We'd have to use far more chemicals to control those pests. The blue tit does it for us. So sometimes we humans, we take these ecosystem services for granted because we never have to pay for them. We don't realize what these birds and what other wildlife are doing for us and how they make our lives a lot easier. So the sheer number of caterpillars that these birds consume is phenomenal. Now the blue tit, it's often confused with another bird, the great tit. Both are green above and yellow below. The great tit doesn't have any blue on it, only the blue tit has that, but the blue can be hard to see from a distance. But probably the best way to tell them apart is by, well, one is by size. The great tit is a bit bigger, but it's the head pattern. Look at the great tit here. The head is entirely black except for a white cheek patch. The cheeks are white on this bird. It's the only white on the head. I go back to the blue tit. White cheek, all right. Dark stripe through the eye, but then white above the eye and then blue on top of the head. There's much more white on the face than this bird. That's a good way to tell them apart. Now, the great tit loves peanuts. It also loves nest boxes. It wants the entrance hole to be a bit bigger. So for the blue tit, it wants 25 millimeters. For the great tit, it wants 32 millimeters. And that 7 millimeters makes all the difference in the world. Less than a centimeter, but that little bit extra will help the great tit. So again, another bird that loves to eat peanuts. You'll see them getting caterpillars in the garden as well. So a very common bird too. There's about 600,000 pairs of these. Again, eating huge numbers of caterpillars. The coal tit, lacking the colors of the previous two, but what it lacks in color, it more than makes up for in character. It's a charming little bird. Like the robin, it can be tame enough to come and take food from your hand. And these love conifers particularly. So if you have some coniferous trees in your area, this bird is often found there. They actually feed mainly on insects that they get in the conifers. And this bird is one of the only birds we have in Ireland where it'll take food away from your bird table and bury it literally for a rainy day. Because when it's raining, it can't find caterpillars. So it stores food so it can access that later. The other tits and the other birds don't do that. Some of the crows do, but that's really it. Like the great tit, it has a white cheek and a black head, but actually the back of its head is white as well. You can only see in this photograph, only see the very top of that white patch. There's a big white rectangle on the back of its head, and the underparts are sort of lovely light beige rather than yellow, and it has sort of greyish olive wings with little white spots. You can see a few of those spots on it there too. And they often hang upside down. They're little acrobats. It's a great one to watch out for. The long-tailed tit, the fourth member of this group, aptly named. Look at that tail, it's ridiculous. A friend of mine describes these as flying teaspoons because the tail is longer than the bird and a tiny little head. Looks like they have no neck. They do, just their feathers are fluffed up around it, but dinky little things. You never see them on their own. They're always in flocks, little family groups of about a dozen birds. And unlike the other birds we've seen that come and go from your bird table all day long, long-tailed tits are different. They rove over an area of many kilometers. And they'll arrive in your garden, they'll land on your feeders, they love peanuts, they'll land on your feeders, and they'll feed there for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then a little timer goes off in their head and says, have to go, move on somewhere else, and they might not come back for another week. So if you're not looking just at the right moment, you'll have missed these birds, you won't realize how common they are. I often see them. I'm sometimes fortunate enough to appear on as a guest on the Today Show, which is on RT, which comes to the RT Cork studio. So I drive from Wicklow to Cork quite regularly, and I often see this bird on the drive flying across the motorway in front of me. So do keep an eye out. You see these birds in flocks going across the road. You can tell by this ridiculous long tail what they are. No bird in Ireland has such a long tail. I mentioned earlier that the wren is Ireland's second smallest bird, so it begged the question, what's the smallest bird? Well, it's this. This is the goldcrest. This is tiny. A colleague of mine has caught this under license with a special net, so he can measure it and weigh it, put a little ring on its leg with a number on it so he can track it, but the bird hasn't been harmed in any way. I use this photograph just to show how tiny that bird is. Take a look at your own fingers right now. Hold your hand up in front of you, compare it to what's appearing on your screens, and see how tiny that bird must be. Minute little thing. They're found here year round. They don't come to bird tables. What they do is they feed up in conifers. So having coniferous trees helps this bird. And that beak is adapted to help them take insects out from between pine needles. That's what they feed on. So you can see how small this bird is, but what's even more mind-blowing is how little it weighs. This bird weighs 5 grams. And to put that in context for you, a 20-cent coin weighs 6 grams. The next time you're counting out change for the parking machine and you have a 20-cent coin in your hand, hold it there and realize, wow, Ireland's smallest bird weighs less than that. How can it survive on a diet of insects even in the coldest weather of the year? And yet it does. It's absolutely amazing. On a cold winter night, like around now, this bird will burn up its fat reserves. It'll burn a gram of fat. So it goes to sleep weighing 5 grams. It's a gram of fat there. In the morning, it weighs 4 grams. It's lost 20% of its body weight. And then the following morning, it frantically has to find enough insects to put on enough fat to get back to 5 grams. So now it has to put on 25% of its body weight in order to survive the next night. Shows how precarious their existence is. So yeah, it gives me kind of a new respect, I suppose, for the trials and tribulations of these tiny little creatures. Here's a starling. I put this picture in just to show how attractive this much maligned bird can be. This is an adolescent starling. It's molting between adult plumage and juvenile plumage. It has the head of a teenager and the body of an adult. So that's how you can see this here. That's a bird that sometimes will descend en masse onto your bird feeders, and people often complain about them. They're noisy and messy, and yeah, they can be hard to deter because they arrive in flocks, they crowd out other birds, they make a mess of your washing line. I do get that. However, they're also responsible for one of the most stunning sights in all of nature. That's the starling murmuration. And the huge flocks gather together, sometimes hundreds of thousands of birds. Only happens on winter evenings just before dusk. And they stop behaving like single birds and become almost like a collective organism. No birds in charge, but they twist and turn in the sky like smoke. If you go to Birdcare YouTube channel, we have some videos of it there. And we have a special starling murmuration survey at the moment. Keep an eye on that. You might see where there's murmurations close to you, where you can go see them. Starlings remain common, although not as common as they used to be. So these numbers, the murmurations aren't as common a sight as they used to be. If you went back a few hundred years, everyone in Ireland would have seen this on a daily basis in the winter, no matter where they lived. But now they're fewer and further between. That's the starling anyway. There's a few more to show you before I finish up. This is the pied wagtail. Charming little bird. I always associate these with car parks and with tarmac, with driveways and with train station platforms. They seem actively to seek out human-altered substrates. They don't really want to be so much on the lawns. They want to be on the hard surfaces and on the patios. And what they do is they're looking for little wind-blown seeds and insects that are sheltering there or hiding in the nooks and crannies and the crevices. And little food scraps the humans have dropped too. And it's amazing. It doesn't look like they're getting much food, but they do survive and they do very well. And then you see them walking around. Most birds will hop, jumping 2 feet together. Wagtails walk the same way the crows do, and we humans, 1 foot in front of the other. And as they do it, they bob their tail up and down. Nobody knows why they do that. It seems like a waste of energy, bobbing the tail, but they do it. And this bird, it's often funny, you see them if you get too close. Rather than fly away, what they often do is they scurry away like a little clockwork toy. This is a male here. We can tell that because he's very black on his back. The female looks very similar, but her back is dark gray rather than black. So you see a contrast with the color of the head. That's how you tell them apart. So the male's a bit darker than the female. But one worth looking out for, and I'm sure many of you know this bird, the woolly wagtail, it's often called. We get birds of prey in gardens too, and a lot of people get very perturbed when they have other bird feeders up and all of a sudden they see one of these, a sparrowhawk, coming in, dashing out and grabbing a blue tit or a chaffinch off their bird table. People get very upset about that. But of course, I understand why it's disappointing, it's upsetting to see it, but it's part and parcel of nature. And people think that I'm attracting these birds into my garden, I'm luring them to their deaths. These sparrowhawks are awful, they're evil. Of course they're not. They're just doing what it takes to survive, the same way that birds do. Never forget, most of our garden birds are predators. Sparrowhawks might feed on other birds, but blue tits, they feed on baby butterflies. They massacre tens of thousands of them. We have, if you were a worm lover, you might think that the blackbird is the worst creature on the planet, destroys thousands of them. The same with the sparrowhawk. Sparrowhawks end far fewer lives than blackbirds or robins or blue tits. I'm not being facetious about it. That's the way you have to look at nature. Every animal has its role to play. And the sparrowhawk, the fact is your bird table isn't increasing the number of birds being killed. Yes, you saw it happen at your bird table. If your bird table wasn't there, that sparrowhawk would still have killed a bird that day. You just wouldn't have seen it happen in your garden. And having actually this bird in an area, it's like you take it as a compliment, because rather, it's not that predators, apex predators like hawks, control the numbers of their prey. It's the other way around. They're controlled by the numbers of their prey. They can only exist in areas where there's a healthy, vibrant population of smaller birds, which means there must be a healthy population of insects and plants. So it's actually a good sign if you have a sparrowhawk in the area. This one here is a young sparrowhawk because it's very brown. The adults are much grayer than this. And also the males have particularly an orange red on the face and on the chest. Another way we can tell this is a young sparrowhawk is because it's quite naive. It let the photographer get very close. And how can I tell that? Well, if you look closely, you can see the photographer clearly reflected in the bird's eye. So an adult sparrowhawk would never let a human get that close, but the young ones tend to be a bit more naive. That's the sparrowhawk. And again, bird adaptations of beaks for certain types of food. That hooked beak is for tearing flesh. That's what they do. They actually kill with their feet, and they have long needle-like claws, talons. They kill with their feet. They tear their meat with their beak. And the final bird I'm going to show you here today, it's one of the most colorful you've ever seen in an Irish garden. This is the waxwing. Look at that. Who wouldn't want to see that in their garden? They don't come to bird tables, but if you plant rowan trees, particularly, or any kind of sorbus, they love them. You can see one here eating berries. Now, these birds only come to us in the winter and not every year. Every 4 or 5 years, we get a big influx. And they're so colorful. Look at the crest on the head. They've got stripes of the yellow stripe on the wing, red dots on the wing. That's where the name comes from, waxwing. It looks like the old wax that was used on letters and legal documents. And yellow tips at the edge of the tail too, crimson underneath the tail too. Colorful bird, about the size of a starling. They're always seen in flocks as well, and they're never on their own, always in big groups, making a chattering noise like jangling bells. And people always say, this exotic bird has escaped. It's very tame. It must have come from an aviary, or maybe it's come from the Amazon rainforest, or from somewhere like that. And quite the opposite. They come from the Arctic. They come from the boreal forest of Scandinavia and northern Russia. And they rely on berries. So most years there are enough berries in the winter. They feed on flies in the summer. In the winter they eat berries. And most years there are enough berries in Scandinavia and Russia to support them. But every 4 or 5 years in a cycle, the berry crop fails. And out of sheer hunger, they flood into places like Ireland and Britain and France. And they turn up. And the thing is, when they turn up, they don't go to nature reserves or national parks. They tend to turn up at housing estates and in supermarket car parks. And people think they must have escaped because they're so tame. It's not. It's because you're the first human being they've ever seen. Where they live, they never really encounter humans. So they don't associate us with dangers. They can be very, very tame. And they're focused on eating berries. And they're berry eating machines. They eat 3 times their own weight in berries every single day. Literally in one end out the other. If your car is parked underneath them, you'll know all about it, because a flock of waxwings will just leave berry residue everywhere. You can get quite close and walk almost up to them with your phone to take a picture, because they're so tame. If you try to touch them, obviously they fly away, but they're tamer than you expect a wild bird to be. That crest on their head, they can raise it and lower it. Now, their diet of berries leads to a bit of a problem around this time each year, especially if there's been a heavy frost. What happens is there's lots of berries and a heavy frost. What happens is the berries will freeze, and then they'll thaw. The juice inside has expanded. The water has expanded because they're frozen, and the juice cells burst. And those cells are full. The juice is full of sugar. It starts to ooze out. And then in the warm sunlight, what happens after the thaw? Well, what happens is that causes the sugar in the berries to ferment. And of course, when sugar ferments, it turns into alcohol. And the berries become very alcoholic. Now, if you're a blackbird and you're eating a couple of berries and then you're eating some seed and some worms, it doesn't have much of an effect. If you're eating nothing but 3 times your own weight in alcoholic berries every day, it takes its toll, and the birds become absolutely plastered. And we get reports occasionally, or especially in big years up when there's lots of waxwings around and lots of berries, we get reports of these birds totally drunk, falling out of the trees, landing on people's heads. We had a picture someone sent us once of one standing on top of their cat's head. It's a pretty risky way risky way to carry yourself. So if you find a waxwing in that condition, the advice is the same as if you found one of your friends and family in the same condition. You want to let them sleep it off. So take them, put them inside a shoebox that's lined maybe with something soft like kitchen towel. That's just the birds, by the way, not your friends and family. Then put some air holes in the lid, take it inside, and leave them to sleep it off for a few hours in the quietest, darkest room that you have. It needs to be very dark, very, very quiet, nice and warm. And wait a few hours. Hopefully then they'll metabolize the alcohol. Then take the box outside. Don't open it inside the house, because if you do and the bird has recovered, it'll immediately fly out and it'll just fly around your house. Just take it outside, open the box, and hopefully then the bird will fly away, maybe with a bit of a headache, but it'll probably then go repeat the same mistake a few days later. Like we humans, they don't learn. But that's so drunk waxwings. That's a sort of weird problem that you get around Irish gardens. And finally, just before we go to the Q&A part of this, I just said I'd make a sneaky plug for membership of Birdwatch Ireland. So I'd say if you're the kind of person who's been willing to give up over an hour of your morning to listen to me prattle on about birds, you're exactly the kind of person we need to join Birdwatch Ireland. We have about 15,000 members, and they're all people exactly like you. Most of our members don't necessarily know all that much about birds. Many are beginners, and we have lots of expert bird watchers too, but there's a role there for everybody. And obviously the money we raise goes to support birds and conservation. So when you join, you get a lovely magazine called Wings that comes out 4 times a year, telling you all about the work we do and that you're funding, birds to watch out for each season, where to watch birds, always a section on bird-friendly gardening, crossword competitions, all of these things, and lists of over 450 events that you can go to each year. For our junior and our family members, we also have Bird Detectives magazine, which it's aimed mainly at primary school age children, but I know a lot of adults who love it as well. And it's based very much on children getting their hands dirty, experiencing nature themselves, taking part in surveys, and it's all about the nature that they are going to see themselves around their gardens. I've spoken in a lot of schools over the years to thousands and thousands of school children. Every class you go to, there's a child who's interested in wildlife, particularly interested in wildlife. But they know far more about the birds and wildlife of sub-Saharan Africa or Antarctica or the Amazon rainforest than they do about the birds of their own gardens. If you ask them to name an endangered species, even the most nature-savvy child will say giant panda, polar bear, snow leopard. They're not wrong. Those absolutely are endangered species, but they won't say corncrake, curlew, puffing. They won't say these things because they don't think of them in the same camps. These are birds found in Ireland. They're not exotic, or they don't get enough attention. We need children and families and teachers to learn much and know much more about the birds that live around their homes, that whose lives they can influence, and who are telling them all, giving them evidence about the state of their own environment and how it affects our human lives. So going a bit of a rant there, but bird detectives, that's the way to do that. And also, if you join as a family member at the moment, you get a pocket guide to the common birds of Ireland, a field guide that shows you all the birds you have in your garden or when you're out walking. So membership runs for 12 months from when you join. So if I can persuade you to join today, it'll run till this time next year. And you get these magazines, you get a lovely welcome pack too, with a set of posters, the poster about garden birds, poster about seabirds, information about our surveys and our nature reserves. Membership for individuals costs €50. For families, it's €60. And then there's a special concessionary rate for under 18s, students and senior citizens, and that's just €30. And to do all that, if you go to birdwatchireland.ie after this talk, right at the top of there, you'll see join as a member, become a member. Click on that button up in the top right of the screen, and you can join by card there. Or indeed, you can give us a call. The phone number will be on the website there too, if you prefer to do it over the telephone. And we'd love if you do that for us. Make it mean a lot to us. So I will stop sharing my screen now. I hope I haven't bored too many of you, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions there. And I'm happy to answer, stay as long as it takes to answer all the questions. That's no problem at all.
Thanks, Niall. That was great. I definitely have to go and Google waxwings after this. They're hilarious. Okay, so we have a class watching today, the Hawthorne class, and they have sent in a few questions. So I think some of them you may have answered already. How long do robins live? And I think you answered that actually in the course of your.
That's right. So I said, three would be old age for a robin. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. They were also saying they walk by the Atlantic Pond every day and they saw an egret with the herons, yes. And they're wondering, are they rare?
They're certainly increasing. So the little egret is like a smaller white version of the heron. Still quite a big bird with pure white plumage, long neck, black legs with looks like it's wearing yellow socks on its feet. It really was originally a bird of Africa and the Mediterranean, but from it was 1997 they first colonized. They actually were first seen in Youghal, just along the Cork Waterford border. Since then they have spread quite rapidly along the Cork coast and all around up the east coast of Ireland as well, as far as County Louth, and they're here to stay. So they're becoming more and more common. So you can expect to see more and more of them, especially around Cork. Cork has always been one of the strongholds in County Cork for them. So yeah, keep an eye out. You should see them with the herons.
Okay, great. And they're also asking, Niall, how do you stop rats taking bird food?
How do you stop rats taking bird food? That can be tricky. You want to try and realize what birds can do that rats can't. So birds can fly and rats can't. So you want to have them in feeders that are located in a place that the rats can't climb or jump across to them. Now, this also goes for squirrels as well. That can help. If you use a bird table or a feeding table, you want to have it far enough away from a tree or a wall that a rat can't leap across. And to make sure they can't climb up the pole, what I like to do is I like to get Vaseline or petroleum jelly, put that on the pole, and they can't climb past that. You need to top it up every few days because it does wear away in the rain. It doesn't cause anyone any harm or any squirrels or rats harm. Don't know if you care about causing the rats harm or not, but it won't hurt them, but they won't be able to climb up the pole. One other thing you can do too, you can get, I get quite I must say, a perverse pleasure out of doing this. If you get really, really strong chili powder, make sure it's pure chili powder, no salt or any other additives in it, and you dust it through the bird food. Birds cannot taste that burning chemical, has no effect on them whatsoever. Mammals can, so we humans are mammals, we can. Rats and squirrels can taste it as well, and they absolutely despise it. So they get this they don't know what on earth has happened, why their mouth is burning. It doesn't harm them, it's a fake pain. There's no damage being done, it just triggers the pain receptors in their mouths, and they learn pretty quickly to avoid that food. So that's, if you have a really serious problem with it, that will work.
Wow, that's mad, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, we have a question from Rose, and she's saying, we've a few dozen house martins at the side of our house. There are climbers there where they nest. Any information on how to protect them?
Yes, so house martin's a wonderful, wonderful bird, one that we're really keen to encourage coming to our houses. It's a declining species and one that we should be very proud to have. They only nest, they build mud nests underneath the eaves of houses. That's where they're often confused with swallows, which build inside a structure. The house martins are on the outside wall. Normally they're quite secure where they are, but with a climber like that, it would allow access maybe for a predator like a squirrel or a cat to climb up. So you want to make sure maybe that the climbers don't go so high that they're encroaching within swiping distance of a cat's paw of the nest. or giving perch there for crow maybe to attack the nest. That's really the best thing you can do. Sometimes I know people who've installed a little wooden shelf underneath that makes it harder for things to climb up onto it. And that's a good way sometimes if you're having a problem with droppings raining onto the wall as well from the nest, that can help alleviate that. Just to say about house martins, they're amazing birds. Those droppings are entirely safe. They don't cause any disease. It's a bit messy, I understand that, but they can be washed off the wall very easily. I always think it's amazing. These birds head away in migration. They head off and they come back to the exact same spot where they nested. Now they're part of the swallow family. We know that our swallows go to sub-Saharan Africa. People often ask me, where do the house martins go? And the answer is, we don't know. And I love that. I love the fact that a bird that is commonly found around Irish gardens, nest in our houses, one of the ones most closely associated with humans all across Europe, we don't know where they spend most of their lives. We presume they head somewhere to Africa, but their wintering grounds have never been discovered, and we don't know what they do. So I find that magical. Sometimes it's nice not to have all the answers, I think.
It is, yeah. We have another question in, someone asking, I think you may have answered this actually, about robins' mating season. When do the babies arrive?
Well, robins will take advantage of whenever the conditions are right. So would you believe we got a report back in the first week of January of a robin that had already laid eggs in a nest that had made a Christmas wreath on someone's door. Now, that is exceptionally early.
Wow.
I haven't heard of one in Ireland that early in the year. And obviously robins doing that take a big risk because the coldest days in Ireland are usually in February or in March. Often in Ireland, we think we've got past Christmas, it didn't snow, the winter's over. February and March are always the coldest months. So we're not out of the woods yet. So they take a risk because then there's a chance the chicks or the eggs will chill. It's coming to that season now. The peak would normally be sort of from April through to July. And I would say May, June is the time you're most likely to see them. But they will have multiple broods. So unlike the brood too, which only nests once, the robin will often have 2 broods. And if there was a particularly nice summer, they may even have 3. So I'd say usually from March onwards, your best chances. But the closer you get towards the summer, the higher the likelihood.
Okay, great. There was a question in by email actually before we started the webinar this morning. It was from Angela. She was saying that she has a goldfinch that she feeds, but she said it's obese. Like it looks really healthy, but it's really big. And she's wondering, like, is there something she needs to do about that?
So that's interesting because it's actually not possible for wild birds to become obese. There's natural checks on that, so it's usually a sign that the bird is sick. People think that birds, when they're looking very fat and large, that they've eaten too much. Normally, it's not that at all. What they're doing is they're fluffing up their feathers to try and keep themselves warm because they feel sick. So unfortunately, given that the bird in question is a greenfinch, I couldn't say for sure, but I suspect it's been afflicted by that nasty disease that I mentioned, the trichomoniasis. That's what it sounds like to me. So just to be on the safe side, I would advise that person to stop feeding the birds for 3 weeks, to scrub their feeders, and to make sure that there's no contamination across, and ask their neighbours to do the same because this disease is very virulent among greenfinches. So yeah, if I hear a fluffed up, fat-looking greenfinch, particular greenfinch, I suspect that disease, unfortunately, because birds can't get fat normally.
Okay, I think it was goldfinch actually, but is that the same?
Sorry, goldfinches can also get it too. So I suspect goldfinches may well be the same disease. So yeah, if you see a bird looking fat, it's normally a sign either it's very cold or it's very sick.
Okay, and in terms of cleaning bird feeders and nest boxes, Niall, what's the best time of year to do that?
So with the feeders, I would do that periodically. In fact, what I do myself is I have 2 sets of bird feeders and I alternate them. So I put one out for a week or 2, and then when I'm time to change the food or replace the food, I take that in, put out new feeders, and what I do is that I scrub those ones in warm soapy water, or if they're particularly covered in bird droppings, maybe a bit of bleach, diluted bleach in the kitchen sink. That's all that's needed. Then just let it air dry, and that's fine. Put it back outside.
Okay.
I know some people actually put it in the dishwasher. I wouldn't recommend that myself because I don't like mixing human and animal food products, but I know people who do that. I wouldn't recommend it. For nest boxes, best of all, you just need to clean those out at the end of the breeding season. So safe time to do that is usually September or October. Birds aren't using them then. So what you do is you get a rubber glove and take out the nesting material. Normally a good nest box will have either a door at the side or a lid that will open on the roof. Take the nest out. The reason you wear the glove is that all nests are full of little parasites, little ticks and fleas and things like that, mites. Harmless to humans, but not very pleasant to have them crawling on your hand. Birds are full of parasites, unfortunately. So just throw that in your compost heap. And then to clean the box out, rather than using any chemicals, get a kettle full of boiling water. Just pour that while it's really hot, boiling, through the box. Let it soak into the wood. Then let it air dry. That boiling water will kill any bacteria and any parasites that are in the wood. And then you can put it back out on the tree or wherever you have it. And it's good actually to have them out there during the course of the winter, because even though birds won't nest in them, small birds like wrens on very cold nights will sometimes go into sleep in them in groups, huddling together for warmth. The record was actually set in England a few years ago. Somebody found in a standard blue tit sized nest box, they found 65 wrens all huddled together for warmth one night.
Wow.
And so it can be a lifeline for them then. So that's what I
Oh,
recommend.
wow.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. Susan's just asking there about if there's going to be a repeat because she missed the first half. Yes, Susan, I will have that on the website probably tomorrow, and I'll share it on social media as well, so you can follow the link from there. Another question from the Hawthorne class. Is it hard to know a male or female swan? I think that's what they're asking. We think it may be the beak that they can tell the difference. Is that right?
Yes, the Hawthorne classes are spot on there. It is indeed the beak. So male and female mute swans, both very large birds. The male is slightly heavier and slightly bigger, but when they're swimming in the water, it's hard to tell that. But the easiest way is by looking at their beak. So swans are pure white, apart from their beak, which is orange with then black at the base. And where the beak joins their face at the forehead, there's a black bump on the forehead, quite a big black bump. And that's usually substantially larger on the male than on the female. So if you see the two together, the male will usually be the one with the larger black bump on the forehead.
Okay. You guys seem to know a lot about your birds and seem to be watching a lot of birds. That's great. Hope you're enjoying it.
Fantastic.
Okay, so that's all the questions. Niall, thank you so much for that. It was fascinating as always. It's just, it's always amazing to hear about all the different birds and their habits and stuff. So as we were saying at the beginning, we have a bird table, which has been given as a prize by a brand that we sell in store, which is Peckish. And by the way, the food that you mentioned, Niall, I was noting sunflower hearts, Niger seeds, peanuts, and lots of other types of food are available at Bandon Co-op in Bandon, Kinsale and Enniskeane, and also online at bandoncoop.ie. And actually the website bandoncoop.ie is a good place to look to see just what kind of stuff we do have, and there's a little bit of information on which birds they suit, so you can find out which food to get to attract the birds that you want to attract into your garden. So we have a bird table for the winner who was chosen at random today, and that's Rose Foley. So congratulations, Rose. I'll get in touch with you by your email address to organise your bird table, and I hope you have loads of enjoyment out of that, watching the birds out of your window. So we'll wrap it up. Niall, thank you so much again for your time and all of your interesting facts. And if anyone has any follow-up questions or whatever, you can contact me through the social media channels, and I'll pass them on to Niall if that's okay with you, Niall.
Oh, absolutely. The more the merrier. I love getting questions.
Thanks a million. Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.